Okay, Nicole.
Ready?
Yep.
All right.
Welcome, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you, wherever you are around the world. It's a very small, intimate group today. And so that's why we set this up in a meeting style so that we can all interact and get to see each other at various points throughout the course of the hour. We'll give it another second or two as more people are admitted to the space. You're welcome to turn your cameras on and join me. My name is Rob Vember, coming to you from Cape Town, South Africa. I am a senior advisor with the Global Business School Network, and this particular meeting, of course, talking about building community disaster resilience as part of the HUMLOG Challenge. This is the first formal official kickoff to the HUMLOG Challenge for 2021. Of course, the second installment thereof, as brought to you by the Global Business School Network and our wonderful partners and sponsors at the Honkin School of Economics and their HUMLOG Institute. So you're very welcome. I would ask that you please introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know who you are, where you're from, meaning country and institution. That would be useful, whether you're a student, faculty. Please share some details with us in the chat function. We look forward to meeting all of you and hoping to answer as many questions as you have to offer today, whether it be directly related to the HUMLOG Challenge or just around the general conversation about community disaster resilience. So please, all of you feel very welcome, and please do interact with us in the chat. As I mentioned, you can use the chat function when it comes to the Q&A portion as well. As soon as our speakers start, you're welcome to leave all of your comments and questions in the chat, and we'll have a dedicated Q&A portion towards the latter part of the session where many of those questions and answers, again, as it relates to both the HUMLOG Challenge itself as the competition, but also just more generally as it relates to all the wise words of wisdom that our speakers no doubt will have to share with us on this very important topic as we continue to make our way throughout this pandemic and hopefully get to see the other side of it sooner rather than later. I will be introducing our CEO in just a moment's time, but before I do that, maybe to those of you who are new to the Global Business School Network, just to give you a brief history of who we are. We started within the International Finance Corporation, which of course is part of the World Bank Group. This is some 18 or 19 years ago. We have since become our own fully fledged organization. We are a registered NGO based out of Washington, D.C., but with really a global footprint, as you can see here. We are now in excess of 120 schools, in fact. That's business schools largely, located in over 50 countries. We have some new corporate members who have come on board as well. This all corporate members who are aligned towards our mission and our vision at the Global Business School Network, which is to improve management and entrepreneurial skills for the developing world. So although we have these organizations, institutions, business schools, universities, and those handful of corporate members, they're all really focused on improving management and entrepreneurial skills for the developing world. And you'll see, therefore, why the HUMLOG Challenge is so important to us in terms of building the kind of future that we all need to be able to build together. To give you more info on the Global Business School Network, what we do, where we've come from, and to talk a bit more about the HUMLOG Challenge in particular, I would like to ask our CEO, Dan Leclerc, who is in Florida, to join us on screen and to share a couple of words. Dan, good morning.
Good morning, Rob, and everyone
who's joined us today, this morning, this afternoon, this evening in some cases. And Rob said I was going to tell you a lot more about GVSN, but I don't think I need to do that. Please do visit our website and take advantage of what Rob has already said and explore a bit further what we do, because really the reason why we're here is everyone else on the call. So my job is pretty easy. The first thing I want to do, and you'll hear me do this often, is to thank again the Hunkin School of Economics and the HUMLOG Institute, Giori and her colleagues at Hunkin, for their leadership in this space of humanitarian logistics, but also their willingness to bring it to our community globally. So without the Hunkin School, this challenge, this opportunity would not be possible. But I also want to, again, I will do this often throughout, is thank our judges. Both the preliminary judges are a great team out of the Goa Institute of Management, but also our finals judges who are shown here, at least the ones that are joining us for this call. Thank you, Armand, Giori, Courtney, and Amade. But I also want to thank the last year's winners team, the last year's winning team, for joining us today to answer a question. But most of all, I want to thank everyone who's participating this year. I know not everybody is able to join us for this call, but I want to remind you about something before I turn it back over to Rob. It's a challenge, it's a competition, yes, but really what matters to us is the experience. So take advantage of it. Do something you've always wanted to do but never felt the opportunity. Connect with people that you haven't been able to connect with in the past. Use this opportunity for the experience, not just for the opportunity to win the challenge. We're looking forward to all the ideas. We're looking forward to framing these challenges in an interesting way for management folks, as well as for business folks, as well as for engineering folks, whoever's involved in your teams. So thank you again, everyone. We look forward to a great experience working with you over the next several weeks.
Thank you so much, Dan. And as you see in front of you, as the screen is still shared, to welcome now our finals judges, as Dan mentioned, and our speakers for the next panel discussion. Amity Prevost, who's a senior advisor at Chappell Consulting and the former chief operational risk officer at the World Bank. Courtney Davis Curtis is Assistant Vice President for Risk Management and Resilience Planning at the University of Chicago. Armand Bum is the Head of Social Impact at the University of Stellenbosch Business School in Cape Town, South Africa. And then Giori Kovac, who's the Urco Professor in Humanitarian Logistics at the Hunkin School of Economics. I welcome all four of you in particular. And also, as mentioned, I do welcome everyone else. You're welcome to turn on your cameras. If you view us in gallery mode in the meeting setting, Nicole will make sure that we're all pinned and you get to see us all nicely jammed together on these screens. It's the one beauty, I guess, that's come out of lockdown and come out of the pandemic, is the fact that we seemingly have become more together than we have been in terms of groupings of people where we've ordinarily been so separate. So I want to start there, and maybe, Amity, I'll start with you in terms of our levels of preparedness, talking in a global sense now, before we get into the specifics of the kind of the challenge and what as a finals judge you'd be looking for. How prepared or not prepared were you on a whole? Were we on a whole, would you say, globally speaking, for what has hit us in the form of this pandemic?
Good morning, good evening, good night to those who are far away in different parts of the world, and I apologize for the bad lighting. I'm up in New England and it's pouring rain, it's dark, and so, but I hope that everybody can hear me well. This is a tough question to answer, Rob, because the reality is that some parts of the world have been probably luckier if you look at what's happening at the country level than others. I think that the real issue which we are still facing is the limited availability of COVID vaccines around the world. And I think that the COVAX initiative is doing an extraordinary job, but not enough, not fast enough. So I very much hope, and I keep praying that we will accelerate, we will reach every corner of the world, not too late. But that's leaving aside the issue about the pandemic itself. I think we've all dealt with, apart from that, with a combined economic, social, political shock in addition to the public health one. And every country has had to deal with it in its own way. Now, you ask me, were we prepared? And I would almost be tempted to say that at the household level, at the community level, we are always prepared for risk events. The human race has, in a way, survived a lot of calamities over centuries and millennia. And I think that we have something embedded in us, which is that survival instinct, and that survival instinct which expresses itself at the household, family, or community level. So what continues to impress me is the way we deal with risk events, not just the ones we know how to deal with, but the ones which are challenges, which require calling on all the brains around the family or around the community. And I think this is where I put my faith into. But I'll stop here. I know we'll have so much to learn from each one of the competing groups, so much to learn from all the students and also from all the faculty members involved in this. And I might come across as a veteran for having looked at my colleagues across the World Bank Group for the last 7 years. But I think that every day is a new day, and every day we learn new things. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Amity. And you make an interesting point about at the the base level of the home always being prepared and making a plan within that context. But Giori, from an institutional level, looking globally, you were shaking your head along in the affirmative, and it would be, anyone would be hard pressed to disagree that we're not moving fast enough insofar as the equitable access of vaccines. But from a global institutional point of view, were we prepared? Did we think we were prepared?
So this is an opportunity to talk about the famous gray rhinos, right? The question is, was COVID the black swan or a gray rhino? Black swan is really something which is completely unexpected, which takes everybody by surprise. The gray rhino is something which we know is a risk, which is part of our risk universe. But we just assume that it won't hit us, not in a short time. Or we might be absorbed with other issues which are more urgent, or are the ones which we feel comfortable talking about in the environment in which we actually work. So I would argue that the pandemic itself was actually a gray rhino. We had pandemics in the past, and I think that we were able to deal with them partly with tremendous ingenuity and talent and mobilization of people involved, and tremendous sacrifice for the people who were in the first line, but also with luck. So Tim Hartford, the Financial Times undercover economist, argued in a column a few weeks back that the COVID crisis was a near miss. It's hard to accept, but you could, if you think about it, you realize that in fact it could have been much worse. So there is an element here of trying to look at what has been happening, what is happening, and so indeed how community resilience at different levels have actually helped us survive. I mean, I think that we also look at the way the economic impact and how a number of people have lost jobs in the pandemic, how a significant amount of people have indeed fallen back into extreme poverty in a number of different country settings. But again, this is the community at the community level that resilience has demonstrated itself. So now, if your question is, are we able to deal with problems of that nature in an efficient manner? Well, that's a question which I hope collectively we'll be able to answer as we come up with maybe proposals for how the world should kind of prepare itself for greater calamities. I think my hope remains, though, in the way the G20 functions. The G20 has been an extraordinary body, maybe not as effective as we would want when we look at one particular dimension. But I think that it is actually kind of probably the place where collective action by the international community gets articulated and gets implemented. So I want to look at looking at the future, I want to look at the glass half full rather than the glass half empty. Over.
Thank you, Amity. Giori, I'll ask it in a different way. Do you have faith in the existing global structures that we have, having seen what we've just been through in the last 18 plus months? Are those existing global structures the right kinds of structures to take us through these kinds of disasters? Giori?
That's a very good question, Rob, and it's probably not an easy one to answer, because there are existing local structures as well, not just global structures. And I think one of the biggest issues that we are after in this challenge is also to see what is the local structure, what is the community level of preparedness, and how can we help communities on the ground. Now, as for global structures, a lot exists, a lot is there, both, from the humanitarian logistics perspective, but also now particularly pertaining to dealing with pandemics. I agree with Amede that this was not a black swan. There has been so much knowledge in advance that the pandemic will hit. And even if it would be a black swan at some point, one actually has to think that, okay, NASA, for example, prepares for the zombie apocalypse as well. And that is one of the preparedness plans. I mean, you do prepare for the potential outlier one way or another. But pandemics are not outliers, and it's not a black swan. So in that sense, that's probably a bigger problem if we were not prepared. And obviously, there are many shortcomings that we had to address and that we continue to address. In terms of faith in institutional structures, we would really love to hear more from the various communities that also all you as participants in this challenge represent, because to be honest, nothing globally can be solved for every single individual community, and it's really important to tap into what is there and how people prepare. And just as Amade previously mentioned about preparedness, there's also a lot of research about resilience that focuses not just on the individual, but especially on the community, on the social aspects of it and the social networks of it. And there are a lot of those kinds of institutions and structures as well to be brought in here.
And of course, the whole purpose of the HUMLOG challenge within the broader context of the pandemic and everything else that we've been discussing so far today is really that local relevance aspect. And Armand, you're the head of social impact at the University of Stellenbosch Business School. From your experience, how have communities come together and perhaps picked up the slack that they shouldn't have been in charge of picking up in the first place, where structures have failed? What have you seen, and what lessons have you been able to garner so far?
Thanks, Robert. And I'll preface this by saying that I've been a practitioner for the last 20 odd years working within the social sector, and the question of balancing our society is one which we have to deal with here. And you're right to point out that during this pandemic, what we had seen was governments and their inability to do the things that nonprofit organizations or social sector organizations were able to do a whole lot more effectively and efficiently. And I think that, to me, is quite critical when we look at where the solutions to these problems should come from or could come from. Our ability to engage with these grassroots organizations, or at the level of grassroots organizations, I think is important. For me as a judge on this, innovation is wonderful, but if it doesn't lead to the development of ecosystems for more innovators to come along to address these problems, I think we're going to sit with a similar challenges if another pandemic of this nature comes along. So I think that's key. How do we create these ecosystems for innovation that I think we need to sustain ourselves.
And Courtney, certainly not asking you to speak on behalf of the entire United States, but the context is different from where I'm sat, from where Armand is sat in terms of access to vaccines. You have the surplus, and in fact, we've got COVAX and other entities on this continent and in other developing contexts, asking for that surplus to be shared, whereas you're having to convince some of your fellow citizens to actually take up the vaccine. What are the other areas where you've seen, or perhaps it's not other areas, perhaps that is the area where you've had to focus on encouraging communities to actually get more proactive, and that this is not, the risk continues, I guess is the shortened form, right? The risk still continues, even in the United States where there is surplus at the moment. What is your biggest concern right now as far as mitigating that risk?
It's really interesting when you think about vaccine distribution here in the United States, particularly in this next phase or tranche that we've entered into. When you think about it, we've been able to distribute vaccines since about December of last year, going through a prioritization of the population for those who are most at risk. Within the last few weeks, we've actually then received support from the FDA and the CDC to issue booster shots for certain populations of our community. When you think about that, when there's other communities who lack access to vaccines, not only are we still trying to convince a certain portion of our population to even get their first inoculation, there's a subsection where we're like, here's your opportunity to get your booster shot to further help you. And so we still have this divergent issue here in the United States. But one way I think that local governments and other entities and organizations are working to solve this is actually going in the opposite approach and mandating it in order to work in certain places, in order to receive certain benefits. And so, only time will tell to see exactly what that impact may be for our local communities here. And politics certainly is playing a role if you look across the country and the uptick of vaccination and where you're seeing certain communities that have a higher rate. And unfortunately, those who have lower uptakes are still very much so impacted and seeing these surges with the Delta variant, et cetera. And I think that's what may be giving some pause here alone.
I want to encourage everyone to please continue, if you're just joining us, to introduce yourself in the chat, but also any questions or comments that you may have, drop that in as well, whether it's about the general conversation or more specific to the HUMLOG challenge itself. We'll make sure that we cover as much ground as we can within the hour. Amity, were we always kind of, certainly for the layperson, I would argue for myself, not as aware as I am right now, was the risk community, so to speak, at the lack of a better collective noun right now, always as cognizant as I imagine you are now of just how systematic and systemic risk was and how connected it was on a global scale. Is that a correct observation following off the back of this? Were we always aware of just how connected the risk actually is? So as much as, again, the US right now has a surplus, Africa is lacking, until everyone is vaccinated, we're still sharing a lot of the risk, surely.
You're absolutely correct. And so the risk community is a construct of the mind. I'm not sure that we actually talk to each other as much as we should. And I think that the opportunities such as this one, where we can actually come to issues about risk acknowledgement, risk mitigation, risk preparedness together from a broad range of perspectives, are kind of few and far between. I think that you should also look at the way even the business school universe has probably discovered or rediscovered risk as a subject matter as a result of the pandemic. And so I mean, in a way, it's not clear that we had the level of consciousness that we should have had. But if you look at the institutional level, for example, unless institutions are regulated, there is no mandate which says that they should be worrying about risks. So universities, and Courtney kind of is here as a testimony to that, hospital systems, airlines, the manufacturing industry, the natural resource industry have always had to manage risk. Were they fully conscious of what they were doing, and was at the senior most level, at the board or board of regents, or board of director level, were they really aware of kind of what was being done in the front lines or kind of at the business unit level? I'm not sure. I think that we should take advantage of this crisis to raise the level of consciousness and to raise the understanding that institutions not only need to be prepared to respond to risk events and crises, but at the same time can leverage that opportunity to transform themselves and to accelerate change. So I will leave that as a point of conversation for my fellow kind of judges and panelists. And I think that I would hope that as you, under your guidance, as you suggest, we think about what is the best way to leverage of this crisis. Over.
And Giori, were we always aware, and this is part of Nicole's question in the chat as well, the prime example that was not even COVID related, but certainly I was going to say a little ship, but there was nothing little about it, ever given in the Suez Canal. Was it always obvious that our supply chain was so fragile, the systems globally, that it was so fragile that, you know, a run on toilet paper at the start of this mess was going to cause so much chaos? Was it always something that was known, again, within the quote unquote risk community?
So in the supply chain management community, yes. Supply chain management has for the longest time been focusing on how to cut costs and how to make sure that all the products that you get in a shop are the cheapest possible and compete against one another and so forth. And of course, we've been focusing on a lot of ways to streamline processes, to have to cut out any kind of slack, to make processes lean. But then, of course, that the same way we made processes a lot more vulnerable. So yes, it was known. There have been a lot of endeavors also before in order to make supply chains more agile, more responsive, more robust, more flexible, depending on the kinds of products and the kinds of services that have been probably done better or worse, and depending on where in the world you are, that might have been done better or worse. Now, if you have currently the pandemic and on top of it, say, a wildfire, you'd have really a different type of exposure to, again, different kinds of vulnerabilities. If you have the pandemic and on top of it Brexit, and you don't have the drivers to bring you the fuel to the UK, you're in a similar kind of overlap and difficult situation. Was Brexit foreseeable? Yes, the same way we could have foreseen it, we could have done things about it. I think sometimes we also underestimate of how much supply chains would be part of the answer and the solution to all of these kinds of problems.
And so within that broader kind of macro context, having laid that all out, Armand and Courtney, I'm going to come and ask you the same question as it relates to the kind of University of Chicago community. Armand, how, with those limitations all in place, right, on global levels, governments not working as efficiently together as they should, international institutions not working as efficiently as they could, how do we better prepare local communities?
Wow.
And I know. If we're being expected to lead ourselves, where do we start?
Let me respond in this way, Rob, because it's quite interesting how Amadi has positioned it in terms of risk. And I sort of, as he was talking about risk, for me, in the local context, in the environment which I live and on the continent of Africa, when you talk about risk and this particular issue, I see the issues of inequality. And so I want to frame it from a perspective of inequality rather than just risk. I think inequality is what we're trying to address on a global level are on a national level and then within our communities. And I think when we start to look at these challenges in terms of who has access to what and how they gain access, we distill it down to this issue of inequality. How do we get our communities to participate? I think it's a big question. And as a practitioner, the way that I've had to go about doing that in practice and then also within a business school environment is there's a large part of this that sits with the aspect of education. How do we unpack these problems and explain them to each other in such a way that we stay connected to them? And I think that's important. How do we connect to these issues at a community level, first and foremost? And it's very difficult in a context like South Africa when we think about what's going on all the time. People are dealing with, in our country, issues of access to water in so many different ways. The elite, the affluent, they look at water as a recreational, from a recreational perspective. There's that aspect. So when it is that you come down to our townships, to the communities, people look at water in a very different way. And so I can't answer your question altogether other than to say we've got to get down to those grassroots organizations within our communities. We've got to unpack and show the connectedness to these issues. And everybody is affected by inequality. No wealthy person can say they're not affected by inequality. In fact, they are. They're either driving it or they're solving the issue. Those who are immersed in issues of inequality, that experience poverty, they are the ones that have solutions too. And so for me, it's bringing people together and making them understand that this is not one person's problem, not one organization's problem. We are all connected to the issue of inequality, and how do we all look for a way to solve that together? So Rob, I don't know if that helps you, and that's a silver bullet in any ways, but it's that issue of let's change the language. Let's talk about inequality and not only about risk, but I think that's really a way to look at it. But is that not our issue here? Are we trying to address this issue of inequality?
Yeah, and I just to share, it's in the chat for you all to see as well, but None Dube has just commented saying, thank you for this comment, Armand, on the inequality dimension. Very important. Interestingly, there's a lot to learn about the intersection between the resilience and modest resource use in resource poor settings, but the research community is largely absent in those settings, or Southern researchers don't have the attention. Thank you, Nani, for contributing in that manner. And yes, Armand, I know it's obviously an almost impossible question to answer, certainly, given the constraints of this conversation, but I hope all of the students and HUMLOG Challenge participants who have joined this call, you're getting the kind of broader sense of why we've focusing the challenge on developing community resilience and the local aspect of the challenge that is so vitally important, because overarching, we share so much when it comes to these challenges, but there's still very specific details that may differ from one community to the next. And so, Courtney, to pick up on what Armand has said, or in fact, any of our other speakers, when it comes to developing that local community resilience, what is the most key factor, would you say? And no doubt we're going to hope to see this come out in some of the entries for the challenge as well.
Yeah, I think one of them is certainly realizing that you are of the community in which you surround, right? So creating that as your base foundation should hopefully give you a purpose in what you're trying to instill to be able to see that local impact. When I think about an organization like the University of Chicago, we're placed in Hyde Park, the south side of Chicago. And while we are a prominent elite institution, the community around us suffers in some regards. And so, we have to be civic and minded in terms of how we engage with that community. So as we're educating future researchers, future teachers, et cetera, keeping in mind and connecting them to those local resources are important. And even how we as an institution have responded to COVID, for example, I think may be something that's relevant for the other judges and certainly for the students competing in this. When the pandemic started, not many of us thought that we could shut down and be ready to go. It was quite a surprise how quickly we were able to do that. But many of us were able to continue in our jobs, and working remotely. However, there was a large portion of people in our community who weren't. Those were the workers who were feeding our students in the residence halls, or those local businesses that were impacted by not having our students or other stakeholders dine in their restaurants. And so what did the institution do? Find ways to provide grants and resources to those folks to, I won't say make ends meet, because I think this went on a little bit longer than we all anticipated, but identifying those issues early on, thinking of your community and helping to address the immediate needs is certainly a place to start as we think about the long-term solutions that may be able to help us sustain. I think, as one organization is better and the local community is better, I think we are able all to give back to the greater good of the world.
Unmute myself. Thank you, Courtney. I want to at this point bring in our winning team from last year to kind of join the conversation and speak more specifically to their experience of the HUMLOG challenge. Maria, Diana, and Giori from Team Los Andes, who were exceptionally impressive with their submission that won first prize of the HUMLOG challenge last year, and of course $5,000 other than the bragging rights as well. Welcome to all three of you. So glad that you're able to join us again this year, and curious as to the highlight of the challenge. I know students are often, apprehensive in terms of time commitments, and there's so much going on, and depending on what part of the world you're in, this time in particular, the start of the academic semester or year for various parts of the world, it's a challenge and can be a challenge in and of itself. Maria, I'll start with you. What would you say was the highlight of last year's challenge that may spur people on and think, you know what, we'll give it a try anyway? You're on mute. Oh, someone needs to unmute you, Nicole. I don't know that Maria is able to unmute herself.
Yes.
There you are.
Hi, how are you? Thank you, Rob. I will love first to introduce myself and my teammates. We are Maria, Giori, and Carolina. We are from Colombia, and we are students in the Master Supply Chain Management in la Universidad de los Andes. And that is a very interesting question, and Giori will help us with that. Giori. I think maybe Giori.
She can, yep, she can unmute herself.
Giori, you can do it. Ya puedes activar el micrófono, ¿sí?
There we go.
Hi, Rod. Bueno, the highlights were to identify the vulnerable communities affected by the pandemic, also to find a practical, sustainable, and applicable to hide the disruption in the water supply chain.
Good, excellent. And what would you say, whoever wants to take this one, what was the most challenging part of it then? If that was your highlight, what was challenging? Carolina, Maria?
Okay. Carolina, please help us with the question.
Hi, everybody. One of the most relevant aspects was to perform the field and exploration work to experience the root problem of the community and analyze the possible viability of the proposed solution. Another challenge was to consolidate the information obtained during the field work and the research on the humanitarian logistics in order to be able to share it through the limit of the words on the reading report and the video.
And insofar as advice goes, I mean, there are a lot of teams who have signed up, and we're hoping more will join after this particular call. Is there any particular specific piece of advice you'd like to give?
Carolina.
Any one of you?
Carolina.
Is that there? Okay.
Yeah, third question, please.
Okay, recommendation will be to identify the problem and try to make that the problem and the solution meet the expectation of the challenge. As well, the proposal solution should be practical and applicable. Sorry.
And I think that's an important point, which no doubt our judges will drive home as well. These solutions need to be kind of based in reality, at the risk of stating the obvious, right? We want to make sure that you come up with solutions that are practical and that are implementable, and not just necessarily in theory. We'd like to see that you did the work and did your kind of show the evidence that you've done the work when your submissions are reviewed. I see someone else has also asked in the chat, and I believe Maddie may have posted the link. There is a rubric for the challenge as well. For anyone else who's missed that, it is available, and it is available in the chat. How important was community consultation as part of this process? Maria, Giori, Carolina, how important was that process?
Yes, it was really important for us. I mean, the community consultation and to be able to go there help us to acknowledge the root of the problem in the daily life of the community, which can differ compared to what the media shows, because we were working with an indigenous community and they live in a dispersed area away like from the urban part of the city. So that experience gave us a better understanding of the situation, the real problems, the daily problems that they face. And in that sense, we could shape up our solution to meet their needs, which are pretty different when it comes to communities, special communities like this.
Yeah, I mean, it's so vitally important that the local aspect of this, we can't stress enough, because really, as much as we have commonalities in terms of a lot of our challenges, you need to make sure that you have a proper understanding of what's going on in the community around you, at least the chosen community that you've decided to address the specific challenge around. And then finally, to last year's winning team, what was the most valuable aspect of partaking in the competition, would you say?
Okay, yes, we have many of them and all of them were very positive. But for us, we can say that the awakening of our interest for the academic research and to mix up the supply chain management concepts to the reality. And it's something that in humanitarian logistics is so important. I mean, it's not the same, the business supply chains that the humanitarian supply chains. It's a pretty big difference, and the concepts can differ when it's the moment to apply them to the community. And also, of course, to compete in an international level with a lot of people from all over the planet, and to be able to see the other problems that humanitarian logistics is facing, and to have the possibility to connect in one-on-one interview with the judges was also very nice for us. But overall, the experience at the beginning, and the process, and at the last part of the challenge, it was very nice for us.
I'm sure, Giori, it warms your heart to hear her say the impact that it's had on thinking around research on the university level. I saw a comment of yours on LinkedIn recently where you were shouting from the rooftops, and so it appeared, and rightfully so. It's finally, people are realizing, and Amadi made a point earlier, that the importance of supply chain management and risk as part of a stream within business schools, within management education, that all of a sudden it's the in thing, and everyone wants to partake in that. Are you getting that around Honken in terms of whether it's applications to your programs or just the enthusiasm around the school? Have you seen that uptick, so to speak, during the course of the pandemic, Giori?
Yes, we actually have. I mean, both in terms of just the sheer number of projects that suddenly we were asked to do, both nationally and internationally, and not just with humanitarian organizations, because we've been working for quite a long time already, but anything from public health to really commercial supply chains wanting to learn from this and apply the knowledge from the humanitarian area in their environment. That has pretty much exploded. And for a good reason. I mean, there is much to learn. There is definitely a lot to learn from humanitarian organizations and how they prepare. But there's also a lot more to learn still that we haven't yet maybe brought in, and that is still exactly what the challenge is addressing, all the community aspects of it and all around the world. And last year it was fantastic to see the winner team was obviously like extraordinary with all sorts of different aspects of the challenge. But I mean, we had the 5 finalists from 5 different continents of the world, addressing exactly those inequalities that we've been discussing already today before, and trying to really bring in the humanitarian logistics concepts to communities and learning from communities back. I think that is a bridge that we can only address and maybe just connect through this challenge. So I'm really so much looking forward to the next solutions in this challenge because of that.
And I want to remind everyone with the remaining moments that we have left to please put your questions in the chat. Nicole, Maddie, if I've missed anything, please just shout out at me so that I can raise that. I do want to go around the room insofar as the finals judges that are here and ask them to kind of share the top line, the highlights of what they're expecting to see, what they're hoping to see as part of these submissions. Armand, I'll maybe start with you. What are you hoping to see from entrance students who are entering this challenge? What do you want to see?
Thanks, Rob. So as I started off saying, the notion of innovation is useful, but what I'm looking for is, what does it produce beyond that? Is there an ecosystem that one then creates in terms of innovating to solve whatever this issue is? I think that first and foremost for me is the key thing. And then speaking to something Courtney addressed, the connectedness to the problem, my positionality, how it is that I immerse myself, or how closely I get to this issue, I think is also important for me. So as the participants were explaining, they got that opportunity to engage with those who are affected most by this problem. And so I'm looking for that, how close people actually get to understanding what the issue is at hand. And those are two of the key things for me. Where you draw your inspiration from within, from those around you, from the environment, I'm looking to see how it is someone has, or the group has actually internalized this issue to a large degree. And that thing about, does it make a difference? Are you taking an idea and enhancing it, or are you leaving a solid idea for other people to pick up and to carry forward? So it's not about solving a problem today only, but what do we do with these good ideas that I'm looking to see?
It's a high bar, but it's a bar that we need to clear if we're going to make any meaningful difference. So I certainly appreciate that. Amity, what are you most hoping to see?
So I'm very curious, so I want to be challenged as well, but let me pick up on a couple of points. Giori spoke about research, and I think that Armand echoed that as well. I think that there are ideas or solutions which emerge in one particular context, which may be applicable in other contexts in the future. And I think this is very important. The ones which come to mind in the context of COVID, the invention of the mRNA technology 10 years ago, which then found an application for the development of COVID vaccines. There is, in that spirit, if you think of how the pharmaceutical researchers in the face of new diseases are going to first try to use existing kind of compounds to test them, as they say, off-label, to see whether they have particular applications. So that's one thing. The other one which is important is, and I want to echo the point made by Armand and Courtney about the issue of inequality. There is inequality of resources, very clearly, but there is no inequality of talent. I think ingenuity, creativity, drive, there is an unlimited supply of those. And I think that what is very exciting is to see how human ingenuity, no matter the conditions in which it is applied, can actually just be create winning solutions. So to me, for those of you who saw the little interview I did as we were preparing for this, I was asked, what should we invest in priority? I said, invest in human relationships. What I would hope to see is how each one of the competing teams demonstrate how problem solving is strengthening the community, making it more resilient and making it an inspiration for others. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Amity. Courtney, your words, what are you looking for? I guess this is generally the part that students are most interested in, because they want to, how do we tick that box to make sure that we've covered the ground insofar as what that particular judge wants? What do you want to see?
Sure. So, I'm looking forward to seeing students identify today's solutions for tomorrow's problems. And of course, innovation and ingenuity are certainly a part of that. But when you're faced with these risks and challenges, there's these items that you need to mitigate, that I think there's an upside of opportunity that needs to be explored as well. So it doesn't have to come from a negative vein or the oh, woe is me scenario, but I think we could figure out how to optimize some aspects similar to COVID, being able to, well, we can work remotely type of idea. So finding that opportunity with the positive spin in there as well.
And Giori, you have the benefit out of all of these judges of having sat through last year's and kind of gotten a better sense of what works and what doesn't work in the context of the challenge. Maybe you want to share from that aspect what perhaps if there's anything that stands out that you saw that didn't quite work as well versus what you want to see.
I think generally what worked the best were the teams that very much in detail went through, okay, what is it that we're actually looking for? So I do urge you to go through all the different resources that I saw that Marina also was sharing in the chat, including a lot of the Q&A sessions and things like that. They help a lot, and she's incredibly detailed and positive in explaining them. So please have a look. What also worked is like, last year we were, of course, having a somewhat different topic. So let me just focus on this year's topic. We do have 4 different types of disasters that we are focusing on. So do choose one that, and ideally choose one that is something that you do get exposed to, that is relevant to you, that is relevant to your community. It's possible to have teams from different institutions, both within your community or across the world, if you just happen to have the same kind of disaster that you are seeing, for example. And to give you an example there, I mean, wildfires is something that we have anywhere from California to the Cape. Okay. Earthquakes is something that we have in all sorts of different earthquake zones around the world. And you would know quite well which kind of disaster profiles the countries have that you live in. And if you don't check out disaster profile with your country's name, you'll find it, I'm pretty sure. So those kinds of things will help you on the way to find the problem that is relevant. But then most importantly, and this is where, for example, Maria, Carolina, and Giori were incredibly good. They've argued very well of what of that is endemic in their community. What is the specific problem? What are the particularities that come from the location or from the community? And then they addressed those and came with innovative solutions that would overcome those. What they also did, and this is of course a step almost further, but this year we are actually also helping you with this. They went the extra mile. They went and checked out the feasibility of the solution, talked to companies who could be doing it, who could deliver it. And I think Maddie can probably chip in here what GBSN is doing this year to help you in that. But we really want to see these solutions also implemented at the end of the day. So they shouldn't just be kind of, you know, conceptual pieces for the sake of a thought exercise. So we do encourage you to do exactly that and follow the last year's winning team's footsteps and really discuss with industry and the community of what is possible and what can be done to address the problem we found.
Thanks so much, Giori. Some really useful bits of information. I want to ask Maddie to unmute herself, and in the meantime, Nicole, I see Freddie's got a question. Maybe we can unmute him and get him to pose it, because I'm not sure that I entirely understand his question, but we can get to that in a second. Maddie is the one who so many of you have already been in contact with and will continue to be in contact with. All of your questions generally end up in her inbox. So Maddie, maybe at this opportunity, are there a couple of standard questions that you always get and that you've got to kind of respond to on a daily basis, or anything in particular that you think we've missed that will be worth answering for the students right now?
Absolutely. We are so excited to have you here. And I noticed that Noni, one of our judges, is also here present. Thank you so much, Noni. We had Najet as well. Radhika, I see you. So we have a lot of available resources via our judges and our team from last year. The questions I get most are regarding team amounts. So 2 to 4 students per team. We are open to having larger teams if you would like, but the form does request 2 to 4. If you are an individual and looking for a team, we can certainly work with you on that. If you register as an individual, I will work on getting you into a team. As far as prototypes, I saw that question, Freddie. We're not necessarily looking for a tangible prototype, but rather a a solution that is implementable and drawn out. And so we're not looking for that actual box of a solution, rather the plans to make that solution. Of course, if you want to go a step beyond and do that prototype, we are not going to hold you back from that by any means. And if you do have any questions at all, I'm going to drop my email in the chat again. A lot of those questions can be answered via the Q&A session link via YouTube, as well as the resources and the handbook. All are linked on the website and in that other link that I provided. So thank you.
There's another question, Maddie. Thank you, from Navya, wanting if you could please share a timeline for the submissions for the challenge.
Of course. So there, we did have a timeline for the moment that was for registration, but we have since removed that. So teams can register up until the date of submissions that they're due. They are due October 24th. That is the only date that you need to focus on for that. So if you want to sign up a team on October 23rd and submit that next day, we are not going to hold you back. I did also want to reiterate that you can have cross-disciplinary teams. So if you are a student and you have a colleague who's perhaps in the healthcare studies field, or they're in engineering or biochem, whatever it is, if they want to join this competition, they are welcome to do so as well. We only need one person from each team to sign up their teams. Let me see if there's...
Yeah, whilst you have a look, let me maybe just to second what Maddie said and just drive home the point that there really are minimal barriers to entry insofar as signing yourself up or signing a team up to take part in this challenge. We encourage multidisciplinary teams. We, of course, encourage the fact that they are teams, so that we come up with these solutions together, that you work together. We encourage you to form teams that are across various institutions. No one's necessarily going to get more points for that, but it is encouraged. So by all means, and as Maddie said, this is kind of perfectly set up for the procrastinators. Your only deadline is the 23rd of October. Not that we encourage you to procrastinate, but that's the 24th, right? That's the only...
Yes, 24th.
Yeah, that's the only deadline that you have. So we're really trying to make this process as simple and as seamless as possible for you. Maddie, do you want to add something else?
No, and we did choose the 24th, so you have that weekend to also come up with your solutions. Right. I was a student at one point, but I believe Gyungi has a question.
Yeah, Gyungi.
Yeah, not that much a question, and rather a comment that we also, of course, help you so much on the way. There is a lot that GBSN has already put up for you. There's even a microcredit to be had if you just take the HUMLOG MOOC at the same time as submit something to the challenge. And we do encourage you to do that, because it's in those cases, if humanity and logistics is not very familiar to you, that MOOC is a very easy way of getting into it and learning about the concepts that would also help you in preparedness related questions and resilience related questions. So by all means, go for the microcredit as well. You get a lot out of that.
Absolutely. And if you take that course and then do the submission, we are offering you a unique academic certificate that can be added to your resume, your CV, your LinkedIn. We know how important those credits are to you as students. And then lastly, I just wanted to remind students who register as their team, there is an opportunity to create an introductory video. We have a really great video that came from a team in the Philippines, the Asian Institute of Management. It's on our YouTube channel introducing their team. So we are definitely encouraging that as well.
And all of this information lives online, right? gbsn.org, and you can click through. It will be easy enough for you to find, and your fail-safe is always, there's Maddie. She will answer to any email and any question that you send her. She's all over it. She's on top of it. So please make sure that you register your team. There are, of course, a lot of people on this call who've already registered teams. There are some of you who are perhaps unsure, wanted to get a bit more information. Hopefully we've covered a lot of that ground. As I said, more questions, get in touch with Maddie, but make sure that you please register your team so that we get as many of you on board as possible. And then also there's the Sondro pre-recorded webinar that will be released on it was the 12th of October, correct, Maddie? They've muted you again.
Correct. And that webinar is out of Universidad Gajah They have a really interesting program that you can use as a resource for your studies. They're going to be providing insights into their natural disaster community resilience program, Sanjo.
Fantastic. Well, all that's left for me to say is to say thank you to all of you for coming and spending your morning, afternoon, evening hour with us. We really appreciate it. Hope that this has been helpful. Just generally, never mind the challenge, just as part of conversations that we should all be having when it comes to disaster risk and community resilience, and hope that we all continue to be safe and keep safe as the globe tries to grapple with this pandemic, and hopefully we all see the other side of it. Thanks so much to Gyongi and Armand and Courtney and Amity in particular for sharing your thoughts with us today. And we look forward to you getting some very interesting and worthwhile submissions as part of your final judges pack. And again, register. If you're having any doubts, reach out to us and we'll make sure to persuade you in the best possible way. Thanks everyone for coming along. Have yourself a good morning, good afternoon, and a good evening. Take care.